The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And then he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So inquiring minds need to know, did anyone here travel recently to Illinois and purchase a Powerball ticket? No? I mean, I guess you heard that $1.3 billion jackpot was, the winning ticket was sold the other day in Illinois, so no one? Guess we're going to mark that building project off for this year. If only someone would hit a jackpot so we could do some stuff, right? That made me think back to the start of the pandemic just 2 years ago, when we had those few months where the building was closed and all of our worship moved fully online. There were more than a few people who came to me and said, "Pastor, I bet you never thought you'd be a televangelist." And no, I never thought that would be something I would add to my resume. And I guess it did not go very well because I'm still waiting for the windfall from all of that. Seems to be pretty well known that televangelists are much more lucrative than any other pastor gig. But I guess it didn't work that time. But isn't that kind of the direction our minds go when we hear this parable and this impassioned plea from Jesus to be rich towards God? I'll gladly be rich toward God once I find myself in that terrible and foolish situation of being rich myself. When that lottery windfall finally blows my direction, or when my barns and silos are stretched beyond capacity, or when I've worked long enough and worked hard enough and saved X amount of money, which is always a well-defined and never-moving target, then I will defy all expectations and be rich toward God. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" I think we miss the point on so many levels. I think the world misses the point on so many levels. And I also think this rich man gets a bad rap. The foolish rich man, the rich fool, it even says on the front of the bulletin. This guy is ostracized because he happens to have a bumper crop one year. He wants to store them away because you're certainly not going to throw them away. And what happens if next year isn't so good? But then that storage might require some larger, storage. He needs bigger barns, bigger bins. Why would Jesus not want him to do that? Well, the Bible is not against storing things for a later time so that you can be prepared. We've heard plenty of those stories, right? The story of Joseph, who under Pharaoh stored away crops for 7 years so that Egypt was prepared when it faced the famine for the next 7 years. There was that time God told the Israelites to collect extra manna on the 6th day so that they would be prepared for the Sabbath on the 7th. They wouldn't have to go and collect more food. Jesus even told that parable about the bridesmaids who were waiting for the bridegroom to return, and they were to store oil in their lamps, and they would be wise so that they would be prepared for that return. The foolishness, then, does not seem to be about collecting and storing things to be prepared for what is to come. So maybe the issue here, then, might be that Jesus is concerned about why this foolish man is storing away all these extra crops. Because after the rich man makes the plan to store away his crops and goods, he says, I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. That's what makes him foolish. That makes him foolish? Again, I don't think Jesus is saying that we are not allowed to rest or not allowed to eat or drink or be merry. Those can be good things. We know those are great things. But then what Jesus says to this man in response to this foolishness is this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Who will these things belong to? Who do these things belong to? The rich man believes they belong to him. And since possession is 9/10 of the law, or so they say, I guess technically they do belong to him. They grew on his land, right? He harvested them, or at least hired people to harvest them. But the point that is being made is that this foolishness comes with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God. Rich toward God. What would that mean? Well, I think we can see that in many ways, and I bet we all have a different idea of how we can be rich toward God. But for one thing, I think maybe we are to remember that God is the source and creator of all the things in the first place. God created the world and everything that is in it. God gives sun and rain and soil so that plants can grow and animals can flourish. God gives each of us the knowledge and the talent to grow and multiply resources and gifts. But then we also hear that reminder from Paul's letter that we are to give up that earthly greed that sometimes comes so naturally. So while this guy is storing up every last grain of his crops, God is asking where God's portion is. God's asking why he's planning to shut the doors of his barn so that he can just be merry for the rest of his days, instead of continuing to do this work and produce and utilize the gifts he's been given. God's asking why he's hogging everything for himself, knowing full well that you can't take it with you, instead of being generous with this abundance for those around him who aren't able to relax and drink and eat and be merry. God doesn't really need our crops and produce and the gifts that we have, so maybe a sign of being rich toward God is sharing those things with those who do. Another way of being rich toward God might be trusting that what we have is enough. In his explanation to the Lord's Prayer petition, the petition that says, "Give us this day our daily bread," Martin Luther writes, "In fact, God gives daily bread without our prayer, even to all evil people. But we ask in this prayer that God cause us to recognize what our daily bread is and to receive it with thanksgiving." That should be familiar, right? I was commenting at the start of the sermon how we often feel that we can't be rich toward God until we feel like we're rich ourselves. And yes, There are even those times where we probably may not even have enough daily bread that we can put our own food on the table or pay the rent this month or buy a new pair of shoes for the start of the school year. But how often do we fall into that trap of feeling as though we can't be rich toward God without ourselves first being rich or having something? But how often does God point out the foolishness of, or the obstacle that being rich can become to living a life that honors God? Another way that we can be rich toward God, I think, connects to why Jesus tells this parable in the first place. It's in the response to this argument between siblings. This person in the crowd comes and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Now that's all the story we get, so we don't know whether the father has already died and one brother is hogging everything, or if this person in the crowd is being like the prodigal son and requesting his inheritance early. But Jesus replies to him, "Friend, who sent me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" It wasn't too long before this encounter, I remember, that Jesus was dealing with another set of siblings who were arguing. Siblings are always arguing, aren't they? Remember a few weeks ago, we even heard it, where Jesus visited Mary and Martha in their home. We heard that story that Mary sat at the feet of Jesus, resting and listening, doing what Jesus called the better part. All while Martha was busy doing chores and trying to make their guest comfortable. We heard where she complained to Jesus that Mary was not doing anything, and so Jesus replies to Martha. Do you remember what he said? He said, "Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things." Worried and distracted. I wonder if the things that we worry about, or the things by which we are distracted, prevent us from being rich toward God. While we are here trying to live by the golden rule that God teaches us about doing to others what you'd like them to do to us, the world has convinced us of that other golden rule. Heard that one, right? The one with all the gold makes the rules. We are worried and distracted by trying to collect as much gold in this world that we can. We are foolish in the ways that we don't share the plentiful ways that we are already rich with those around us. We become greedy and put all of our trust in ourselves instead of trusting that God, a God who has promised and has shown us that He's generous beyond all understanding, that this God is the source and the guide and the goal of our lives. And a promise that God is always rich in love to us and this world. Amen.